Hey guys, this is Dave with Audio In, and I have two IEMs I'm going to be talking about today, the Moondrop Chu2 DSP and the NiceHCK DB2, both of which fall into the ultra budget price bracket. So as usual, we'll go over the contents of the packages, talk about their specifications and design, then we'll get into their sound. We have a lot to talk about, so let's get started. Now again, both of these sets are budget sets, and I think there's only about $1 difference in price between them, depending on where you purchase them. The Chu2 DSP is priced at $24 and the DB2 costs $23. Both sets include a pouch-style soft case, which I like quite a bit. The IEMs fit right in the pouch, and it is very easy just to throw them in your pocket or bag. The Chu2 DSP doesn't really come with a very big assortment of tips. It's basically just one type of ear tip, but they do include one set of each size, so small, medium, and large. The DB2 does come with a better selection of ear tips, and these are nice ear tips. And obviously the biggest difference between the two sets, aside from their driver configuration, is the cable. The Chu2 DSP has a Type-C termination, while the DB2 has a 3.5. They are both 2-pin cables, which is nice because if you do want to swap out the DSP cable for a standard termination type, you can do so. The Chu2 DSP uses a single 10mm dynamic driver, but the DB2 actually has a 2-driver hybrid setup, and it combines a dynamic driver with a balanced armature driver. And as for the design and build, the DB2 has a pretty cool looking faceplate, but the overall build does definitely feel and look like something you might typically see in this price range. The design of the Chu2 DSP is a little simpler, but its build quality and general construction does feel a little more durable than most other budget sets I've tried. Of course, it has an all-metal housing, so it does feel a little more robust. You might want to be careful with the paint though. Okay, let's move on to the sound. Okay, so we'll start with the Chu2 DSP. It takes a harmonish approach to its overall tuning, similar to the original Chu2, but I feel like I'm hearing maybe slightly better bass separation coming out of the mids with the DSP version. And this is with no EQ, by the way. This is just stock out of the box. But aside from the bass, I'm not really hearing a whole lot of other differences between the two. And I don't really feel like I'm hearing much of a difference in terms of technical performance either. Maybe a tiny bit more definition in the treble in the original Chu2, and I do want to talk about a small issue I am having in the treble of the Chu2 DSP in a minute, but let's do a quick sound breakdown and then we'll come back to that. So let's start with the bass. The Chu2 DSP's bass quantity is just right about where I like it in contrast to the rest of the tuning. It has relatively good dynamics, good extension, and it sounds like they paid attention, again, to that transition out of the bass into the lower mids, because the separation is a little better than what you normally get at this price point. That being said, I do feel like there isn't much in terms of tactility and speed, which I wasn't really expecting at this price anyway, but again, I do feel like the bass is tuned nicely. Mid-range is also good. Again, it does remind me a little bit of the original Chu2, so it can at times sound a little thin, but everything generally sounds natural for the most part. However, mid-range detail does seem to be lacking just a little. Now, I should remind you, we are talking $24, so a lot of my little nitpicks are really insignificant when you take the price into consideration, especially considering everything else the Chu2 DSP does right, like the upper mids. I do think they are just a smidge forward, but when you step back and look at the tuning as a whole, some of that energy is actually needed to kind of help balance things out. And it also gives vocals and instruments nice amounts of energy to keep them the center focus. The Chu2 DSP's treble energy is also good, so cymbals and other instruments that land there don't feel buried or lacking in energy at all. However, I do feel like I'm missing some treble detail and micro detail. Again, a nitpick at this price point. Nevertheless, it does still sound pretty natural, and that's probably the attribute that stands out the most to me with this set. And not just in the treble, but also in other areas of its tuning as well. Again, typically at this price point, you're going to see a lot of V-shaped sets that have a lot of issues with unnaturalness. And while this is not the most natural set I've heard, it is one of the best at this price point. I do think the Wanner is probably the only other set I would say might give the Chu2 DSP a run for its money. Now, as far as the Chu2 DSP's technicalities, they're okay. As far as the left to right soundstage width, but you're not going to get much in terms of forward depth and instrument layering. Imaging is decent though. You can place everything within the sound field for the most part, but it's just not very focused. And I do think the Wanner will give you slightly better technical performance overall. As far as comparisons go, I would consider the Chu2 DSP a slight upgrade over the original Chu2 when you step back and you look at its sound performance as a whole. But I would still have to give the edge to the Wanner in terms of both its tuning and technical performance. Bottom line is though, at this price, you really can't go wrong, and I think just about anyone would be perfectly happy with the Chu2 DSP's performance. Okay, and next we have the NiceHCK DB2. So this has a single dynamic driver combined with a balanced armature driver. So it's a dual hybrid driver setup. Its general signature falls kind of into the V-shape, maybe even more W-shape category. But if you step back and look at its presentation as a whole, the upper mids do stand out just a little more than everything else, which is going to push the vocals and some instruments that land there a little more forward, and it's going to have a little more of the listener's attention. Now, in terms of bass quantity, it is more than what you would typically see in a more neutral signature, and you're also going to have some mid-bass warmth as well. Bass dynamics are decent, so it does have a fairly good amount of kick impact and slam, but it's not going to deliver much in terms of bass speed. And because of the amount of mid-bass and low-mid energy, you're also going to hear some bass bleed as well. Not a surprise, again, with this approach, and definitely not a surprise at this price point. What it does give you, however, is a more engaging and fun listening experience. And then moving into the low mids and mids, you are going to be missing just a little low mid-range and mid-range detail. And like a typical V-shaped tuning, you're also going to see some recession in the mids right before the jump up to the pentagain area. Then you have a fairly steep rise into the upper mids, and it peaks out just a little bit early at about 2K. Usually you see that peak after like 2.5 to 3K, and I think sometimes that can even further contribute to things sounding a bit unnatural. Now, moving into the treble, so you have a lot of energy between 2 and 3.5K, and then a substantial drop off in energy between 4.5 and 8K. And then there's an 8K peak, and that is a pretty big peak, and then it drops off again. Then there's another smaller peak around 15K. And I have heard IEMs out there with a W style tuning that sound pretty decent. It's not my preferred tuning, but it can work if it's done right. And I don't know if this one is working for me, to be honest. All that said though, cymbal strikes are cutting through. Treble detail is about on par with many of the other budget sets out there. Technical performance is also about on par with some of those competing sets. But if I'm being honest, this isn't really going to be able to compete with the Chu2 DSP on either a technical level or with its tuning, but I should once again remind you that we are only talking $23. And it really is a fun set and an engaging set. And with budget sets like this, a lot can be overlooked because usually the goal, especially with this type of tuning approach, is to engage the listener and to give them a more fun and exciting listening experience. And this does accomplish that. So that concludes my review of the Chu2 DSP and DB2. Thanks so much for taking the time to watch. If you like my content, please take a second and hit that subscribe button. Also, if you would please like this video, please share this video. I hope you guys have an awesome day.